LCTV, just waiting on Lynn, and then we should be good to go. LCTV, we're good to go.
Oh, Julie's zooming in too. Attendees.
Yeah.
Attendees.
Fewer than the last time. All right, are we ready? Everybody?
Yeah.
Countdown, Doug, or are we just going live?
Oh.
All set, okay, good. All right. Welcome to the July 10th, 2024 Middle School Building Committee meeting. Bring the meeting to order. We do have a quorum. I want to remind everybody again, as I do before every meeting, that this is a public meeting, but it is not a meeting of the public. So there will be an opportunity for comments during the public comment period. Outside of that, there is no opportunity for a back and forth between the board and any other members of the public. That being said, I will open up to public comments again for 15 minutes, maximum 3 minutes per person that would like to address the committee.
I would just like to thank everyone that's received something from me. I'm Sarah Nesbitt on Woolworth. And for every person who's received something from me with my concern at Woolworth, Marty, I was just thanking everybody who's taken email and comments from me about Woolworth. We simply want to make sure, I think, that we have a way in and out for large people.
Can you, if you could come up to a mic, they can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just wanted to briefly thank everyone that has taken something from me, photographs of large vehicles on Woolworth, and we just simply need to be able to accommodate not just the DPW, the trash, the snowplow, et cetera, but other service vehicles, especially lawn equipment, things that have huge trailers that you can just drive a vehicle into and out of again. And so I am assured by various people that you will figure out whether we have a very large circle on school grounds or a current street that has clear access through as it does today will continue. And I want to thank people for listening to me. And I do hope that whatever plan, if you settle on this school, which I don't believe is really big enough, I mean, I don't believe the property is big enough, that you will continue to keep us in mind with that regard. So thank you.
Thank you. Name and address for the mic.
Jim Cooper, 40 Woodside Drive.
Thank you.
I want to jump ahead, but in the agenda, there is a portion where you're going to talk to Mr. DiGiulio's email or letter, right? And is that open for open discussion, or is it only this 15-minute period?
As far as public comments or any kind of commentary,
Yes.
it is only for this 15-minute period.
Okay.
Bill DiGiulio, 8 Woodside Drive. So I tried to put some issues together after the June 18th presentation, which thank you for that. A lot of effort went into putting that on, and it was informative. But for those of us who live on Woodside and Woolworth and Duxbury and Terry and Lockland, it's a little scary because it does appear that we're forging ahead with just a new school on the Williams Field site. And we would really employ you to take another look at some of the other locations. I mean, there's a number of other locations in town. I know some of them have been eliminated due to that matrix, which I had a lot of questions about the matrix scoring, why 4 categories were given a 0, like Turner, Russell Field, where they would have scored significantly higher. But we have a lot of concerns. Safety, traffic is going to be a huge issue. How the school is situated, at the presentation, you had it facing Woodside Drive, which seems a little odd to me to have this narrow parcel of land and then to squeeze the school in, you have to turn it sideways so that on William Street, you're seeing the back of the school, the side of the school. Again, I want to reiterate, I think the location, I know there are no guidelines in Massachusetts, but I think that parcel of land is a little too small for what amounts to, pretty much like a small high school. I mean, the high school is, 1,000 students? This school is going to accommodate about 700 students. So you're bringing almost 2,000 students to a 1/4 mile, half-mile square parcel of town. And, I beg you guys to go back and take another look at other locations. And the reason I'm so passionate about this and I'm sending so many correspondence is because I look at your timeline and I know that this has to be submitted to the MSBA by the end of August, by September. And once that happens, in my mind, it's out of our hands. I mean, it's kind of out of our hands now. I feel like we don't really have a say in this, and that 15 people who don't live in that neighborhood are deciding the future for all of us. And it's not fair. And number 2, I think, again, back to there are better locations, and you can't put a square peg in a round hole. It's just the school isn't going to fit there. So before this gets submitted to the MSBA, I think you need to take another look at some of these other locations, and I'll let everybody else give their 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Richard Ingleson. I live at 31 Woodside Drive. People my age, we walk. I walk the block every day. I see the confusion of these youngsters walking through, whether it's on Blockland, do they look? Let me imitate what I see every day, crossing the street. Youth, crossing the street, looking at their phone. I had one experience a number of years ago. I was driving on Blockland, and at the end of Blockland, there's a lot of trees. And I was driving slowly, and this youngster was speeding down on the sidewalk. My window was open. His head went into my car. He got up, he excused himself, and he apologized, and he took off. Knowing the laws, I did report it to the police department, saying there was a problem. I can't see. We see 350 kids. 700 on bicycles coming from all directions? This is not a safe location. I think I'd be happy for the location if the Department of Public Safety would say, this is a safe location. Then I'll back off and say yes. But I don't see safety in this location. Then another thing I heard. Once, anybody ever tell me, go on record, what would happen to the land on Glenwood? Nobody ever said one word. I heard rumors. Is this another situation what happened in the 1980s where Congress Street, where somebody on the school committee in conjunction with a real estate agent said, this school is no longer in need because we don't have the students. And what did they do? They sold it for condominiums. And then as taxpayers, we had to make an addition to Wolfswamp School and Center School. We lost money. So You know, if there was another, yes, I agree, we need a new school. But the location is not the location. I mean, is this something jamming down our throats? You know, you've got to have another location. I believe it's, as I said at the beginning, it's safety. I watch these kids. You know, 350 today, come up to 700, all on bicycles, or the foggy weather, or the cars coming. No, this is not the location. I thank you, though, and I hope you people who put a lot of time and energy sit down and reanalyze it, you know, because we have to go a step further, and somebody above us for accreditation is going to answer these questions. I thank you all.
Thank you. So any further comments?
I'll make it brief. Terry DiGiulio, 8 Woodside Drive. So a little bit as to what Rich was saying. You know, you're going to spend all this time and energy with this project at this location and all this money when we're not going to go away. I mean, hopefully we're going to get to a vote one day, and we're going to get other people to hopefully vote this down too. So you could save a lot of time, energy, and especially money just trying to look at another site. Bliss Park, I don't know why you can't go there. Yes, there are wetlands. There's wetlands all over Long Meadow. There's no getting away from the wetlands. But there's plenty, what is it, 20 acre or 20, do you know? No, Bliss Park.
Bliss Park is 17.
And then you have Turner Park, that would be perfect. You have so many sites that you can look at. Can we find out the reasons why the other projects were voted 0? Is there any way we can find that out?
This is a couple of comment area. It's not a back and forth. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. All right, well, thank you.
Are there any other public comments? Mr. Cooper?
Yeah, so is there going to be a future meeting where there is going to be a back and forth again?
I will answer that, yes. I mean, we planned multiple engagements.
Before August, or the end of August?
We were discussing time frame. That's something we'll discuss as the board, this meeting or next, in regards to what that time frame is. With summer and vacations, it'll be hard to do it in August, but it would probably be shortly thereafter in September.
So I guess I take it that the voting for the town voting's coming up. Is this something that's being pushed to get on the ballot for this year?
Again, there's no back and forth, but I can tell you this would not be a ballot issue this year.
Okay.
I'll just address one more comment, address Jim's question. So Jim, there is no voting on this. This committee decides where the school goes. And the plan, the preferred plan has to be submitted by September. So a meeting with all of us where we can engage in September is almost too late because it's been submitted to the MSBA. The only voting the town gets is on the funding for this. That's not scheduled until November of 2025. Okay, so that's a year and a half away. The town has, the rest of us, abutters, neighbors, we have no say in where this school goes. But speaking of that, last time we were here, we talked about having an abutters meeting.
Just so you know, we are at time, but I'll allow it to go.
Okay, thank you. We would like to have an abutters meeting. I went to the planning committee, the building committee, and they all sent me right back to you guys. So can somebody here, please, soon schedule a meeting with people on Woodside, Woolworth, Bliss, Williams, the people across the street, Williams, Duxbury. I mean, I think you owe it to the people in the neighborhood before this gets submitted to the MSBA to tell everybody what's going on, because, you know, we're trying to raise awareness, but there are a lot of people, elderly people, they don't have internet, they can't read the paper or whatever. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. Public comments are now closed. Moving on to agenda item number 3, approval of minutes. We have minutes from, boom, boom, June 10th, June 12th. Anybody want a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. Marty?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Chris?
Abstain.
Julie?
Yes.
Armin, yes. That's it for everybody, right?
Me.
Oh, sorry, Lynn.
Abstain.
I apologize, and Lynn abstain. Okay. We have minutes from July 10th. Is there a motion?
Today is
That's
July
today.
10th.
Oh, sorry. It is today. I'm looking at the agenda for today. Those are all the minutes we had then. All right. Moving on to correspondence. We do have correspondence recorded. There was correspondence for multiple people. It will be recorded specifically on the agenda. We have there's correspondence from Mr. DiGiulio and also from Ms. Nesbitt. Thank you very much for your contacting us. And I can tell you there was many more emails as well contacting us, both giving great advice and input as well as great support. So thank you for people for input. Next, we're going to go to Collier's update.
Yep, thank you, Armin. So if you want to start the presentation, you can. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, we can start here. So just schedule real quick, we're currently still on schedule. The PDP was submitted back in May. There was comments that were received back from the MSBA. Those comments and questions were addressed and then resubmitted back to the MSBA. We are currently in the PSR phase, so that preferred schematic report is currently underway and will be submitted at the end of August. With an October MSBA board review for that PSR. And then from there, we would move into schematic design until November of '25, when we would move to a town vote for the project.
So the schedule is for a town vote on November 2025 at this point.
Yes.
Correct.
So we can,
And the other thing about the timeline is us working with the state. So basically, from a timeline perspective, we are on track with what the state is expecting of us at this point.
absolutely, yeah. So those dates are set when the project is first accepted into the program. And so we, like I said, these are dates that meet that timeline from the very beginning.
Any questions for Adam? Okay.
So the next couple slides are just more kind of schedule updates. The next one is the handout that I handed out. It kind of goes over what we just talked about. This is more of a high level. Yeah, we can stay on this one, that's good. So again, this is just more of a dialed-in schedule that we talked about. The only other piece that's in here is the, on September 11th or the 25th, depending on when the MSBA is scheduled, there's going to be an MSBA Facilities Assessment Subcommittee meeting that we'll attend, and that's after the PSR is submitted, and it's kind of a precursor to the board meeting. So they'll do a review, we'll meet with them, they'll go through any questions or anything that they might have prior to it going to the board.
So they've been in the schools before, they're going to come back out and see them again?
Well, they're not going
Is
to
that
come
what
out.
that is, or?
No, they're going to review the PSR.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they'll do a full review of that, and then we'll set up a subcommittee meeting. And then they'll do, similar to what they did with the PDP, except it's going to kind of be
Okay.
in person, it'll be a subcommittee meeting before you move on to the board and then schematic design.
That's their subcommittee.
That's their subcommittee.
subcommittee.
Yep, yep.
We used to go to Boston for those, but I think now they're.
Everything's virtual with the MSBA now, yeah. We won't be going to Boston.
Are those meetings that members of this committee attend as well, or are those meetings that the MSBA has and we just kind of?
No, whoever the district chooses to have, similar to what we did with the PDP. If there's members from this committee that wish to join and listen in and provide comments or answer questions.
A lot of what happens in that meeting is we're presenting an overview of the design that will go into schematic design, and they'll have an opportunity to question the project team as a whole about that. So you have a real range of people on the committee who, from architects to builders, and they'll kind of probe a little bit and explore what we've done. There's an educational specialist who'll ask questions about some of the educational thinking, and it's friendly but useful to the town as well as to us.
Yeah, like I said, it's a precursor going into that MSBA board meeting before they provide an approval.
Any questions? Okay. Moving on to the follow-up to the community meeting and the survey. Dory, is this you?
Yeah, that's me. Great, thanks.
I want to just start. So the board, this is our first meeting since that meeting. So just to understand the process, because of open meeting law, we cannot discuss anything in a quorum until such time as we have a quorum in an open public meeting. So this is the first time the board has gotten together to talk about the feedback from the meeting, from the community, from surveys that we have given out and any input that was into it. So behind the scenes, JWA and Colliers and Marty and Lynn, the town, have been working together to look at some of the issues, the mitigations that are available to us for that, talking to meetings with public safety, both fire, DPW, and police. And this is just a little bit of the follow-up to those meetings and potential discussion here for the first time since that meeting. So just wanted to clarify what and how we discuss things. Yep. Go ahead, Dory.
Great. So just to back up again, to remind the committee that we recommended doing a survey at a point to allow more residents to participate. Not that it becomes a vote process at all. It's not a referendum, but it does help to take some of the issues that the committee is having to make the decision on and gather more input, because there will be people who will come to community meetings and people who won't. So it's really just kind of a helpful check-in, and it can happen later as well. We did a lot of surveying prior to this within the district, as you know, as a part of the visioning process. So this is a chance to reach out beyond this group to the larger community. So we have now 96 responses to the survey. I sent you all a copy digitally of all of the results. Just wanted to share a sort of a summary of what really jumped out. And again, for us as designers, this is really helpful as well. There are often things that come up. I frankly like the ideas in the commentary section specifically, because they can, sometimes the outlier comments that help us to think about where things are going. And really, this is a very long design process. So, you know, I think people will be surprised to realize how much we actually do respond to those comments along the way. So 96 responses, mostly from town residents with children in the school district. And you can see former residents as well, but a good response overall. So as a whole, what was noticeable is that only a very small percentage of 12.5% viewed those existing schools as acceptable as they are. And that 12.5 later tracks quite clearly also with the number of people who found the idea of maintaining the existing schools desirable. So that's the percentage breakdown we have there. But 55%, and these are, again, 80% of the people responding in this survey are people who go into the school fairly regularly with their children or recently had children in the district, found the setting unacceptable or poor. We had a long list of about 10 issues that we were curious to know what people responded to as a reason why they were interested in the town investing in a new or renovated school design, and quite clearly over time it always stayed the same, that those top 3 issues stand out as the most and have consistently, and that echoes what we heard in the very first community forum, which was focused on safety specifically, very strongly coming from Glenbrook, but also the efficiency of a single school over time in the town. That has changed, right? That the community schools have evolved. It's become more clear that there's been an equity issue and differences between the two schools, so that a large percentage here really view the single school option positively, and then air quality and healthy conditions, and that probably has also arisen with COVID response. Equity, in that we were speaking about the fact that there are different conditions at each school, and the desire of making a more consistent experience, and that did change over time as we watched the survey produce. And then STEM and science spaces are a concern. We asked what resources, community resources would be important to the project potentially, and this was actually, I thought, quite a slide that really reinforces what we've talked about. This is exactly what you all have said, so it's one of those situations where it echoed, you know. Multipurpose field was something you all spoke about strongly in all of our early meetings. The idea of a multipurpose auditorium you spoke strongly about, and how that would be an interesting challenge for the community because it has cost implications. And then that concern about a larger gym than the MSBA's standard for middle schools, which we know is quite tight. And then community use of classrooms, noticeably not a major driver. So that reinforces what we have discussed here as well. Sustainability, we had 2 questions on that in general. In general, this varies town to town. We did see this community has a strong interest in sustainability as a driver for the school design. If you can go to the next slide, you can get a little bit more granular there. We were kind of curious then about being sure people think about sustainability relative to cost. Not that all sustainable decisions are costly, but there are some. So here, you know, we see the majority really favors that issue of balancing upfront costs and long-term costs. Only 7.4% prioritized lower upfront cost over the long-term operational costs and sustainability issues. And then this, to me, is interesting simply because it's relatively the same, that from both a fiscal standpoint and an educational standpoint, of the options that were presented in this survey, which were after the PDP was submitted, so the options were really trying to get at the question of the code upgrade versus the ad reno versus new, you know, which people favored, and, you know, over 80% favored the option of a new school over an ad reno or code upgrade. So.
And I'd add that we asked these same questions at the time when we were developing the statements of interest originally, and just to sort of take the temperature of the community, and the results were similar. So that, you know, we've seen that type of distribution for several years now.
On the next slide, I just wanted to summarize some of what stuck out really in terms of shared sentiments. And again, it's really important to hear, you know, discord in many ways as well. But, you know, again, the concern about security and safety and healthy environment, the support for some level of community spaces and what those might be, even if they have some impact on the project. There were a lot of comments about air conditioning that came up in the optional speaking, as well as wellness, sensory, and counseling spaces. Those are obviously things that we've talked about. A new school will be air conditioned, or innovation will be air conditioned, but it's a strong impact. People are really noticing the environmental quality and concerns. Wellness, sensory, and counseling spaces, to hear that repeated so often by people participating in the survey was interesting. And then some of the outlier comments that I just think are worth noting, you know, concerns about the impact on staffing and size of the school, you know, consolidating to a smaller school, and then also concerns relating to staffing and student impact of the process, which we know obviously can be a challenge. So just being sure that we're responding to that. Frustration with how long this process is taking in general, right? You all spoke about it right away, but just there's always a lot of animosity about how the MSBA process that we go through seems to take a really long time. I'm concerned about the traffic at Williams and the loss of the school at Glenbrook as a school for those who are already living nearby. Concerned about the cost of the project and emphasis on STEM and tax impact on seniors. Awareness that proximity to the high school may mean that some of those community spaces we asked about maybe aren't necessary. So community classroom, is that necessary if the high school's nearby, which is a good commentary. And the tax impact on seniors is important simply because it does start helping the committee think about the conversations that will happen in the override, and those things can be addressed sometimes ahead of time. Then we had the meeting the community meeting, and many people here following on that. That meeting had a very different profile and response. A lot of concern about the Williams Site neighborhood being the location for the proposed school. Desire to hear more about site selection process and why other sites are deemed unfeasible. So we will bring that back up in our PowerPoint tonight to allow you to speak to that further. We heard concern about circulation, safety, and impact on side streets, and have had follow-up conversations with the town, and will continue to do so on those issues. We heard concern about a two-story building height, which is obviously a fair concern to residences. At the same time, it is just to explain, economically more feasible, more affordable to do a two-story building. It's a more efficient building, and it is allowable within the parameters of the building dimensions in this area. And I think that we are set back far enough from area residences that that concern will be allayed, and people will see more of that as we evolve, but I think it's fair to hear. Desire for more multi-sport playing field rather than, I think I referenced it as a football field, and we heard that and wanted to respond to that. Desire to explore start-end time scheduling issues. That's something the district has talked about further. And then, well, you will see here in this presentation and future presentations, we'll continue to explore that question about Woolworth and the impact this site has on Woolworth. The alternate loading dock locations and effective screening. We're very early in design, so that shouldn't really be, the screening isn't the moment where we are now, but we will certainly be talking about that further. Studying of queuing and turning lanes, figuring out traffic calming beyond the site. We have started to have those conversations, and then talking about other restrictions. Some of this is commentary we can pass on away from this committee to be talked about elsewhere. Separation of pedestrian, bike, and car routes, that will get much more detailed as we move forward. And then sight lines from residences and being conscious of it. So just wanted to be sure we spoke to the things that stuck out the most in that conversation.
Anybody on the committee, feel free to ask questions along the way. Yes, Josh.
I just want to make a comment on this. I thought it was a good meeting. I'm glad there was a lot of people there. I wish we'd spent time on the school itself. We didn't really talk about anything besides location. I think that was kind of a missed opportunity. And I hope we can, if anybody's watching this, I talked to people who were interested in that and are in favor of the project. They want to hear more about what the school's going to look like. So if anybody's watching now, I would encourage them to reach out to us and send your feedback on, because you can look back at our previous meetings, see the slides, and I think we had 3 or 4 designs. If people have feedback on that, I think it would be really helpful to hear, because we didn't get it at that meeting.
Move on.
So in order to respond to those questions about the selection process, the district asked us to revisit those priorities and the conversation that occurred. So to explain, we have found that matrix is helpful for trying to illuminate the values the committee had and the discussions that were held. So through a series of meetings, we evolved with you these questions are essentially priorities that were weighted by you as a committee against the options. And again, that didn't necessarily mean that the highest number was going to be the selected site, but it gave the committee an opportunity to kind of look at the different options that were presented. So these continued to be the priorities. We're in a different phase, and we could alter those priorities differently for the options we're looking at now. But in general, I think this reflected that. It was a weighted scoring, meaning that if you look at this, what you see is that those things relating to education were deemed by the committee as of greater importance than issues like sustainability. As important as sustainability is, education got a greater weight as a whole with that multiplication process. And then, following that were those things that related to the complexity of the construction process, the grant potential, site issues that are relating to, outdoor useful space, parking, et cetera. So it's a way of kind of trying to synthesize some of the thinking the committee had shared. Next slide. So also just to help in this conversation, we placed all the sites that were formally discussed. There were other sites that were discussed. As you see, this includes Water Tower site and Wolf Swamp Field site, which we, discussed and raised as possibilities, but were not asked to explore because of the committee's discussion about that. But this shows those two sites on a map because it was raised at the community meeting. It'd be helpful if we could see all these sites at once so that as you discuss circulation in relation to them, you can see it a little bit more clearly. So we can refer back to this if it's helpful in any way. So this is that overview matrix that we reviewed multiple times through PDP. It shows the kind of ranking, and again, we actually changed those points like between a couple meetings because the committee reviewed. In one meeting, March 27th, or just after March 27th, actually, April 2nd, the committee formally took off the table the 345s, the options for a single school at Glenbrook. Glenbrook or Williams, but the real discussion was about whether to invest in this project on a single middle school for half the population or pursue a project that would address all of the students in the district. Next slide. So then later on the 17th, we had brought up and discussed Russell and Turner in a meeting, and then we reported back on Russell and Turner because we wanted to be absolutely sure that we'd thought about other sites. So we brought some information forward at that point. And as a whole, because of the point values and where the emphasis was, all of the new 665 options score super, super high. That was based on the emphasis you placed on things as a committee. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they went forward, because in that conversation, the conversation really related to Russell being a site that would be significantly congested and would take out existing sports fields and then would leave the town with two schools that it would have to pay for the demolition of without any support from the MSBA. So those were the strongest drivers that we noted in the minutes. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to Russell. The committee, in terms of speaking about Turner, we'll show more about Turner because I think that was the one that we heard people wanted to hear the most about. But the conversation there had to do with site control, wetlands, and its location. And the committee made a fairly quick decision regarding both of these sites in that meeting. So
yeah, the only other thing I would add to that is that the intersection at Redfern, and maybe you're talking to that with the traffic, the intersection at Redfern and Williams would be a choke point for 80% of the traffic going to that school at Turner. Because there's only one way to get there from that into town. Are we guys going to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Okay.
I'm starting from Matt Stiles, full-time traffic engineer.
Yeah, and we're adding a 30,000 square foot retail environment at that corner as well. So it was just from that perspective, the traffic at that particular intersection was one additional thing.
Could you underscore the maximizing the MSBA grant potential and how a site other than the Glenbrook site or the Williams site would compromise the grant potential?
Meaning, again, the demolition is the thing that jumps out the most. That if building on the Williams site means that the demolition of the Williams building, if you pursue new, would be part of the project cost, and the MSBA would reimburse a significant part of that demolition. Building a Williams site and not at Glenbrook means Glenbrook is a cost that has to be borne by the town separately, or it's reuse. Building away from either school site then leaves both projects, both schools as white elephants for the town to address. So that's one area.
I'd say the other is the development of sports fields, right? So if it was on either Russell or Turner's, you would eliminate town sports fields and then have to pay for those to be placed elsewhere, whereas if it's developed on Glenbrook or Williams, reinvigorating those sports fields is part of the project costs. So again, it helps with the MSBA reimbursement.
The MSBA wouldn't participate in the recreation of the sports fields that you would lose
Right,
if you
correct.
built,
That's
if
some
you
other
built
site.
that at the Turner site.
Exactly.
Right.
So on May 1st, we met again. That was really as we headed into that final phase of the PDP. And in that moment, the committee really narrowed to the base code upgrade option, the ad reno at Glenbrook, and new at Glenbrook, and reaffirmed that decision. I'm sorry. This is where we decided, to move away from Glenbrook, because at that point, we were looking at both Glenbrook and Williams for the new or ad reno 665. And that was the final discussion about that, which had been a kind of constant source of discussion throughout the phase.
And like you just have here on that, I mean, a lot of the conversation on that was because of the central location, being able to bike and to walk centrally. And then also because if we were to do it at Glenbrook, we were going to look at modular, which the state does not reimburse us for anyway, from a cost perspective. And again, from a traffic perspective, at that far end of town, coming up Williams is going to be a clog at that Williams-Redfern intersection. And it was increased busing costs too, just want to make sure all of this is on the videos that are out there, but I just want to make sure everybody's aware that there was deep discussion about all of these things. Yes, Nicole?
Just to add in that in addition to the costs related to the modulars, if we were to move forward with the Glenbrook site, another concern was that we'd be looking at a significant amount of time, multiple school years of time where students would be in modulars, which also has an educational impact and is very disruptive to the educational environment. Could you remind us, Mr. Ray, when did we first begin videoing meetings? When did we first start airing them? Was that early April, or was it?
Oh, it's far before that. I mean, we've been meeting for over close to a year now, right? And we started right after our first or second meeting, so.
Yeah.
So those are all available?
All of these are definitely available, yes.
Okay, so each of these meetings is also just available on the Long Meadow TV YouTube page for folks who are interested in more detailed look at the conversations surrounding each of these particular decisions as well.
Yeah, and thanks to Tracy, Doug, and Brian for that. Yes.
I'm just wondering if Dory could speak to why we are keeping the base repair code upgrade in there if it ranks so low. Just so that people understand why.
Yeah, it's a requirement of the MSBA, and it's a requirement. It works. It functions ultimately as a touch point for the community to understand the cost of doing nothing, essentially, because a code upgrade doesn't make any educational changes to the project, but it is the value of bringing this 65-year-old building, in some cases, up to today's standards without any improvements. And the financial cost of that, which you've seen in the cost estimates, then is a good comparison to the others. It is an option, and it sort of, in a sense, reflects if the project does not go forward, those are the costs that the community will be bearing without participation of the MSBA in the costs. Generally speaking, that's the general thinking.
It's indicative of how much building codes and standards have changed since those schools were built, right? So I think a lot of people express concern over the costs and think that they're inflated, but if you really think about it in terms of we're not just adding elevators, which is very difficult in an existing building, but at this point we're wrapping the entire building in new insulation, new mechanical systems, new electrical systems, new plumbing systems would all be required just to bring that building up to code. So the costs do increase rapidly.
Yeah, Lynn, go.
Sorry, just to really, I want to underscore this because that base repair code upgrade price is for one school. That's
Correct.
the only one that's been costed out. It's potentially the same or around the same ballpark at Williams.
And actually, the MSBA, I don't think they anticipated that this would swing to Williams so quickly because the school of interest was Glenbrook. in our PDP response from the MSBA, they asked that we establish a code upgrade cost for Williams as well and carry both of those forward informationally so the community could see both of those.
Great.
So
Thank you.
We will be doing that.
Can I just-
Oh, yeah,
Can I
sorry,
just
Nicole.
ask you to clarify one more thing as well? When we're looking at a code upgrade, I know one of the larger concerns with Glenbrook is the open floor plan, and also literally the widths of the doors in many cases
Yeah.
are not wide enough for any students who might be needing wheelchair access. Would either of those things be addressed in
They
a
would-
code upgrade?
We included both of those in in that cost. On the grounds that the acoustic ratings required today for classrooms would not be met under the current conditions, and that the accessibility of the school would be addressed. So accessibility in particular is obviously very important, because that can be a liability to a district over time, so.
Thank you.
Yes, Josh.
I just want to make a general comment on these last few slides. I think this is very helpful, and to kind of go back through our thought process again, and especially the map of the sites. I thought, if you look at them, and I don't know if I'm not trying to change any minds here. I know that may not be possible, but I hope you'll realize that we understand that there are problems with all of these sites. There will be traffic problems. There's a lot of them, you can see we'd be moving access to a different side street. Williams does have a main side street, and I recognize that everyone is worried and concerned about the traffic in the area, but a lot of these sites would be moving traffic to somewhere else or creating horrible bottlenecks. Like Turner really only has one access. Wolf Swamp would have one access. It's in the corner of the town. You have choke points all over the place there. And I'm not a traffic engineer, but I read a lot of traffic reports, and that's a big concern. So if we do choose the Williams site, what we can do is work and do our best to make it feasible and safe and timely, and so we can get the kids in and out of school quickly, safely, and we can plan around that, and that's what we're trying to do. I understand the concerns, and we did look at other sites. We've been meeting for a long time. We had public meetings where we talked about these things. I know that I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and whatever choice we make, I think we're making the best choice. So it's a considered thing. We really are trying our best. So that was, if I was at the front of the meeting, I would have said that last week. But I know that it's a tough thing to put into words, and I think that this showing it helps to show that there are major problems with any other site, and we have to work with the best that we can get.
Marty?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is such a helpful visual for me to think about location. And I think it's sort of the best way to think about this in a real quick way is if you build anywhere other than the Glenbrook or the Williams site, you lose the investments that you've made in the Turner fields or in the Wolf Swamp fields, and they're beautiful fields. You lose that investment that's been made. You lose the opportunity to have the MSBA participate in the costs of the demolition of one of the buildings. And then you're adding the cost of recreating athletic fields, which we've heard over and over and over is a really important concern of the residents of this community. So I think when you factor in, there's so much that we have to balance, and I really believe that we have to be responsive to the concerns that we heard at the last meeting. I thought the community forum at the Council on Aging was excellent, and it really helped sharpen my thinking about what we need to do and how we can potentially mitigate the traffic concerns that we've heard. And so it was a very, very helpful meeting, but this is a very, very helpful slide, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to sort of go back and sort of revisit the site selections process. It's really helpful.
Josh?
I just want to add one follow-up point on the fields. If we're moving them, you're taking away fields from a generation of kids. There's a prime time when kids will be using certain fields, and if they're gone for 3 years, they'll never use them. And we have a lot of fields in town. We don't have enough. We had a Parks and Rec study that told us that. And if we take some away, we're in a worse position, and there's a specific cohort of kids that would be affected by that. That would be a shame.
Tell me
Yeah,
when to
that one
stop.
right there.
Yeah,
That
so
one?
that's where we are. If you could go to the next slide, actually. So just Turner Park got a lot of discussion, so and it's a little hard to see the contour lines here, but we wanted to bring this back just to clarify, because it's very easy to sort of assume, this is a much bigger site, it's a very large site. The wetlands issues, and we had shown you all as a committee a little bit grungier, because we had to more quickly map showing the wetland boundaries, and why those wetland boundaries really cut the site in a way that was quite challenging. And we have a copy of that if you want to revisit it. But just in comparison, the buildable area prior to the wetlands is only 11.9 acres compared to the 16.7 of the Williams site. And while there is area beyond that, it begins to slope up very quickly, and it's an extremely expensive prospect to cross the wetlands and get, DEP approval and siting approval, and the expense of doing that is both a time and cost issue. We don't know those times and how much time and cost, because the committee was quite clear that they didn't want to continue to explore that. But looking at it, these were some of the reasons that really jumped out. It's also, as a municipal park, it's less under your control. That was one of the things that we talked about when you reviewed it, is it's a municipal park and therefore could be subject to the Article 97 restrictions that the state put in place, where the state essentially offered that if you permanently protect a municipal park, you can't undo that without an act of the state assembly and Senate voting to allow you to do that. So that creates on projects a multi-year headache trying to just get permission to do something with that property again. So it would have to be vetted for an Article 97 clearance, which you'd think that the state had a clear website on that, but they don't. You have to actually apply and request that information and study. And it has tripped up school projects in the past. So just site control and the constraints physically were the things that jumped out to us, but I know you had other reasons that you spoke about already tonight.
Yeah, I mean, this is just additional considerations that we had during the process, and I'm glad we're just, as Josh said, laying them out so everybody can see what the process was as we went through multiple iterations. Any questions for Dory? All right, so we'll move on to agenda item 7, review of the current PSR design explorations. And a lot of this was good from input that we got from the community, from correspondence, emails, calls, and the community forum.
Right, and we really are very much listeners, and will continue to have conversations. And it's funny, because even after schematic design, when we're in document development, we're still having conversations with the butters about tweaking things. So this will continue. Just jump to the next slide, Marty. Just this is sort of a list of.
Tell the community what PSR, what the PSR.
So we're in the
is.
preferred schematic design phase, where we're just narrowing to the option that we will then spend significant time developing all the materials for, in order to get a more precise budget. After schematic design, when the town has voted to approve the project, then we go into the document development phase. So it's an elongated version of getting to the document phase, longer than you would think, but because it's a public process. And so when we're doing the conversations prior to the vote, people will be seeing a fully rendered building with all the materials established and clear, not detailed enough to build, but detailed enough for everyone to understand. So we're still a ways from that.
Yeah, and at the end of that schematic design is where an estimate is done, and that's where we develop the budget for the total project budget.
So this is more like a laundry list of things that keep coming up in our conversations with you all and with public officials here in town that are continually being reviewed by the design team. So that idea of parent and bus drop-off separation continues to hold. The idea of entering from the southeast allows the safest drop-off for cars, but is not the only option that we're looking at. So we'll revisit that again in new options. Fire and police, we did meet with them and did confirm that they wanted access around the building. That doesn't mean that it's a road around the building, it's an available access for them that can cross the paved area or the playground area. So we've addressed that in these plans.
And I think I would just point out on that meetings with Chief Stocks and Chief Dearborn are ongoing. They are integral to the project plan. I can assure you, and I heard comment earlier about public safety, both from a public safety perspective, would have to sign off on the project and those safety aspects of it, and are an independent voice into the safety, whether the plans and the mitigations would meet their approval.
So in our discussion previously, there was a positive response to the idea of splitting the visitor parking from the larger bulk of parking where faculty and community would park, community after-hour parking. So we've continued to pursue that idea. The idea of preferred maintenance of the Woolworth connection so that large vehicles can move through the site, that we brought back. That was really helpful to hear from the community so we could respond to that. Exploring outdoor spaces around the school that can be multi-purpose. Connections to fields and safe separation of sidewalks, bike areas, and drives. That's going to continue to evolve. That's sort of, as you get deeper and deeper, you get into that further, but certainly we're looking at it. Looking at improving the turning lanes and the traffic controls around and beyond the site, and this is where having a traffic engineer in the room is helpful for that conversation potentially, but that will also get more detailed. But we did have some positive feedback from the police department about adding the school safety zone, slowdowns, and other things that could be done. Vegetative screening at the perimeter. We'll continue to explore pedestrian routes to high school beyond Williams, I think are a larger topic for the town to explore. We heard and we showed different options on the parking spaces and are settling at 200 as a design load for parking. That's more than the district asked for, less than the max option we showed, which was 240. The advantage of dropping to that is it allowed for a more comfortable green space around the sports field so that the field could be more multifunctional. And then exploring optional amenity improvements to that field to really improve it, including, lights and drainage and irrigation.
Marty?
Can I just note, so much of what is on this list is great to hear, because so much of it we don't have right now. When I think about even the vegetation around, vegetative screening around the perimeter, I mean, right now we don't really have that benefit on the Williams site, and the improving turning lanes, the separation of parent and bus drop-off. I agreed with our resident earlier who said that kids today maybe aren't as attentive to how they bike and walk to school as they should be because they're distracted by their phones. So having these safety features is even more important nowadays. So this is great. It's a great list.
Any other input? Okay. Next slide.
So for those of you who are more attentive to the educational plan on the inside of the building, the evolving building ideas that we've been talking about, that single visitor entry, but multiple entries for students, so that we can ease and speed the access into the school. That's been an ongoing discussion. Appreciation of massing that breaks the building up so that as a two-story building, it doesn't appear overwhelming relative to the residential buildings around it. Appreciation of varied outdoor spaces near the building for educational and recreational purposes. Interest in more exploration of that gymatorium and cafetorium option, so we brought that forward today, and we'll talk about that. Preference for clear sight lines, that was brought up by Nicole, talking about security within the school, and that was why one option really stood out, it seemed, to our educators specifically. Desired relationship of the gym to the recreational spaces, but also to the cafeteria, which I heard in that meeting, the value of having those spaces near each other, and then the value of having the community access close to the cafeteria is important. Desire for the cafeteria to be near media, but also for media center to be near STEM. That came through in all of our visioning conversations. Desire for good classroom daylighting, so classrooms that have both north and south light rather than east-west light, which is also better from a sustainability standpoint. Appreciate varied outdoor space types. The committee liked stacking the 7th and 8th grade science classrooms over the STEM, so we've continued to do that where we can, and liked that idea of an intact, specific 6th grade community for all 6th graders. So 2 communities together in a wing of its own. And then we have updated since we presented last, based on conversations with the MSBA and based on, just made some small square footage changes that we'll continue to do up until the point where we send it out for estimate again, based on reviewing the space summary over and over again. But we are showing 2 health classrooms now, and are reducing the alt PE to 1,000 square feet rather than 2,000 square feet. And we've also reduced the 6th grade science room slightly. Those are the major changes thus far. So before we get into the options, I did want to just give you a visual of what cafetorium, gymatorium, and auditorium might feel like and look like. So this is a gymatorium. Oh, and I'm sorry, I titled that. This is actually Granby Elementary in Granby. It's one of our projects, and I put the wrong title. So, it's about a 5,000 to 6,000 square foot gym, right, Christian?
Yes.
There's a door that closes that stage off so that it can function as a kind of a music classroom. Mediocre. It's one of those very challenging doors that nobody really wants to use, but it does exist. And it's helpful to allow that space to be utilized in 2 ways. And you obviously are bringing chairs out, putting some protection down, and putting the chairs out when you're doing a large event using that space.
Is the stage like a standard size, or is it does it vary by project?
It varies by product. So I think on this project, 1,600 square feet is the estimate, and that is smaller. It's an elementary. You also see the lighting. You see the cages for the lighting above. So it's a very limited lighting. And it, for an elementary school.
Or even middle school. I mean, we're not doing any like exotic lighting. So, yeah.
One of the benefits that this district had, they put all of the bleachers on one side of the gym, right, so they're to the right of this photograph. So you can seat quite a large number of people so they purposely, at this size, you could barely squeeze in a high school-sized gym, or you could put in a middle school-sized court, and then have much more room for seating around the edges and that stacking bleacher. So that was the approach they took, and we did invest in a pretty significant door because they were planning on trying to have music in that room
while gym was
in session. I don't know if that was ever a huge success, but we did the best we could.
And the stage in a middle school gymatorium would be bigger than what's seen here.
A little bit, yeah.
So these are cafetoriums. The one on the left is from colleagues of ours out west at Hazel Wolf K-8, and on the right is an elementary school we did with SFMA in Templeton. And you can't quite sense the size of the cafeteria on the right-hand image, but what you see there is this stage is really just, it has that you ramp up to it, walk up to it, so you couldn't really use it for dramatic purposes. So it's a way of making use of it more as an assembly space. And you still have some of the acoustic treatment, and again, loose chairs and seating is brought out and placed in the room. And that's true in both of these, and I think you have a longer approach there on the Hazel Wolf rather than the wide approach that we have on the right. In Templeton, the gymnasium was on the right, and there was the door system that opened so that you could extend even farther to get more, but your view lines were horrible from that area. They're really pretty good in the cafeteria space. So any questions or comments on those before we start looking at that? And then these images are what you would expect for a new auditorium today, similar to what we're doing down the road at East Long Meadow High School.
Middlesex looks like Belchertown. Like I thought it was Belchertown at first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are those much bigger than what we have in the middle schools now?
Your middle school at Glenbrook is pretty, it probably doesn't have as, it's more like the one on the left, which doesn't have as much seating, doesn't have, but yeah, you have, these are probably both seating about 500, and I think that,
The West Springfield one, where those wooden lines are at the bottom
yeah,
of the
and then
picture,
it goes up as well. So
there's
somewhat
more
similar
seating
in
back
style.
there as well.
I think these are, the Glenbrook is a very wide space. It seats, it's got a very high capacity, but it's a broader space, which is it's kind of an interesting design in that way, because I like the way it can work to keep people closer. These have higher loft space. Glenbrook also has some fly space, actually, it's pretty good. So I'd say that what we, again, have been carrying is the size of the Glenbrook Auditorium, which is a little bit smaller than these, and the configuration, hasn't really been determined in terms of width.
Glenbrook also has the hottest chairs I've ever sat in.
Hottest?
Very swell.
Yeah, and the auditorium has the advantage of being fixed seating and having, dedicated, lighting booth space and things like that. So the flip is hard sometimes in the other spaces, and the acoustic treatment can be challenging, but, it's a significant savings to take, 4,000 square feet out of your project.
So I'll go back to Dora's question then. Is there any thoughts or on any of three of the concepts?
They definitely looked different than I expected, in a good way. I think the cafetorium ones seemed the most like they would have a simpler time transitioning to auditorium, based on the way the structure of the room is, height of ceiling, the way the sound equipment, et cetera, lighting. It seemed like it might be a little easier, but both of them seem very, very doable, maybe slightly more innovative on the cafetorium side than the gymatorium side, but.
Josh?
Is there any reimbursement if you do a cafetorium and gymatorium?
Any difference between them?
I know if we do an auditorium, there's no reimbursement, right? That would just be on the town. Is there partial reimbursement if we?
The 1,600 square foot stage is a reimbursable expense. So whether you stick that on the cafeteria or gymnasium or, a science classroom, they don't,
Okay.
that's up to you.
Yeah, I guess this looks better than the left is interesting, looks better than I thought. I grew up with cafetoriums, but I think it would be hard in this town to get rid of 2 auditoriums and go to 0 at the middle school level. But I'd be curious to see what the cost difference would be at the end of the day.
And I would recommend that we actually cost them both out and that you not make your decision about the schematic design until you have a hard number in front of you. And there won't really at this stage of design be a difference between the gymatorium and cafetorium cost-wise. I mean, I thought about it and thought, well, probably isn't going to make a lot of difference right now because you're looking primarily at the square footage.
Right.
So we can certainly do that, be sure that's available.
I do like the cafetorium concept. I think from a music family perspective, the acoustics definitely would play better than the gymatorium. I like the fact that we're going to build a cafeteria anyway, so adding the stage onto it becomes an embedded cost as opposed to one we take on our own. Yeah, the seating might not be plush chairs, but we make it work for town meeting and other things. So I think that's a really good thing to pursue. The other thing I like about the cafetorium is in the final, I still want to see the numbers, but it does reduce the building envelope as well on that site, which, based upon what we're hearing, may be something we need to take into consideration, from a mitigation perspective.
I'll go ahead and add 2 comments here. One in favor, or one argument for why the cafetorium is a good idea, and why it is the MSBA isn't reimbursing an auditorium. It's about utilization of space. So you have X number of students in the school and X amount of square footage. They can't be everywhere at once. So if you can utilize the space up to 70% of the time, that's a lot of air that's not empty and being conditioned all the time. So it's a more efficient building if you can have these spaces utilized in multiple ways. That's the largest argument for it. I'd say the challenge on the other side about the idea of combining them is that when you have cafeteria use, it's middle of the day and it has to be done for that reason. So you cannot easily use that stage for another purpose because you would have a sound bleed. But in your case, you have opted to have 3 music rooms, a band room, a chorus room, and a music room. So you don't have the same obligation to use the auditorium for music class the way you're currently using it at Glenbrook. So that gives you some support.
I guess I would be curious to hear from other communities who have done a gymnatorium or cafetorium. After being in there for a year, is it doing what they wanted it to do? That was some of the feedback on the East Hampton tour.
Yeah.
Was that the gym, it wasn't really working out as well as they had hoped.
It was great for performances, but as you mentioned, during the day when they're trying to practice up there and you have gym class at the same time, we did end up installing a wall similar to what we did in Granby, but you still get that noise that's coming through. Nothing's 100%, where somebody who's used to an auditorium where it's essentially perfectly quiet and they can practice. But for performances in East Hampton, I know you guys went through East Hampton. It was great. They had the bleachers that could pull out, so you could plenty of seating. The the stage was plenty big enough, and it functioned as they wanted it to. But it's during that day that Dory mentioned that they run into the challenges, either with a cafetorium or a gymatorium.
In this project, I also want to be clear that the cafeteria size is not enormous. I can pull up and check that. So the gym has more space to it. That's one of the advantages of the gym over the cafeteria as a combined space. Depending on what you expect your community event load to be there, that could have some impact.
Probably too early to ask what the seating capacity in the cafetorium would be.
We can do a quick calculation while we're sitting here. Christian's right here.
Nicole?
I'm just curious also from a use perspective, when we're talking about shows, concerts, events, et cetera, with either a gymatorium or a cafetorium, what would be sort of the plan for seating? How many staff members do we need to help set up seating? What does that look like? What's the investment when it comes time to host an event in the evening?
Yeah, where do we store it all?
Yeah, where does it all go? How easy is it to pull it back out? How many people does it require? How many hours does it take? Those are all factors as well, because if it becomes like, we have this, but also we really use it like twice a year because it's a huge pain in the neck to use, well, then it's not worth as much as us investing in the auditorium. So those would be factors as well.
Yeah. Move on? Okay.
So the reason why we shared this is because we did want to show some footprints of buildings that were adjusted. So you'll see that in the sequence now. So again, this is, we've tried to remind you of some of the slides you've already seen, just to keep them on the table, that the code upgrades are in front of us as well. So this is the carried forward code upgrade on Glenbrook. You can jump to the next slide. I wanted to be sure we were thorough enough that anyone reading it later could review all of this detail. Per MSBA's request, we'll now carry the code upgrade for the Williams as well in the estimating process. And this just listing what are the terms of that and expectations and advantages and disadvantages of that. So this is the Ad Reno Williams scheme for new 665. At the back where you see the gray area, that's the part that would be retained from the existing building. That keeps the cafeteria and auditorium. It stretches the cafeteria into some of that existing space and then adds new construction beyond it. We've talked a little bit about the advantages of new 665. One of the advantages of an Ad Reno is that you get, probably in this case, 1% more reimbursement from the MSBA. I'm guessing they give a couple points, but it depends on how much, and we really wouldn't be saving that much of the existing building. And that's kind of a relic based on the fact that they give you a little bit more because you also want to carry more contingency on the renovation, because there's a lot that you don't know that you could discover. So it's just to kind of help out in in that situation where you may not have that much funding for it.
Yeah, well, Elaine,
Thanks. So we've talked a lot about the fact that MSBA will not cover the cost of modulars. Can we put some context to that? Like, how much is a modular? How many do you need? How long do we have to, like, roughly have them for?
Let's see, we have a school of 665. We priced modulars for Holyoke for a school of 600, and we had that at, believe it or not, it relates to the duration of construction, but at $2 million, I would say you're probably within.
3.5 to 4 now, but, well,
Yeah, you're
there's-
within a window probably of, 2 to 3.5,
4,
somewhere in
yeah.
there. And that's again, sort of unreimbursable.
Great, that's helpful to know. Thank you.
In this site, you would be also deciding whether to put the modulars on site, or you could conceivably put them at a different location and shift the entire school elsewhere. So anyway, this, again, focuses on some of the challenges here. You would retain the auditorium, but it's a small auditorium, and it's then a small auditorium for a school of 665 students. So that auditorium is serving its current population. It would be undersized, and it can't just be simply expanded, but it was a valuable space, and that's why we approached it this way. There would be some compromises in building energy performance, simply because no matter what we do with that renovation, there are still some constraints to it. So slightly less well-performing than the new school would be, but not significantly so, because it's not a huge portion. There would be some constraints on our selection of mechanical systems. As we talked about a great deal earlier, part of the challenge of the code upgrade and the ad reno is that the existing classrooms, anything built in the 1950s and 60s, has a really relatively low floor-to-ceiling height. So adding new mechanical systems and expecting air conditioning to get into those spaces, you'll have to drop ceilings lower. So part of why you find that this is getting trickier to do renovations is because now we have code obligations to bring a lot more air and ventilation into these spaces. That requires ceiling space. You could sometimes do things above the roof, but that gets not as well performing and complex. So typically you're looking at taking up some of your vertical space, but also you have more chases as well. So you're also taking up some of your floor space. So, and in this case, that would only be in the ad reno section. The new section would be designed and constructed the way the other standards. The site would still allow the geothermal wells, and it has the other advantages of the new option. So, going forward, we have a couple more slides on each of these, so just to give you plenty of time to look through all of these. We're going to jump to site, and we can talk about these, but in all of the schemes, you're going to see that we're trying to show some of the potential circulation, assuming 200 parking spaces, assuming an outdoor field that, again, has area around it now that we can adjust the field size, and showing that how that would generally work throughout the site, as well as on the right, trying to show, as was requested, the queuing potential, not the queuing that you're planning for, because we're only talking about 4 buses, but, you could conceptually show more buses here without any conflict. So on the right-hand side, the yellow reflect the buses, and the white reflect cars, to give you an ability to see the difference between these options as we go through it.
How many cars do we know?
Yes,
Is that
it's
on the
at the
campus?
top, 60 cars.
I'm sorry. Okay.
So
Yeah.
200 parking spaces, 60 cars, and 7 buses are shown. And again, that's mainly because of the breadth of that area. It doesn't mean that 7 buses will be there. So we're showing a primary, what might end up, I would say, being likely faculty parking space on the upper left. Visitors might also be in that area. And then you have the parking wrapping and extending around. So some of the parking is a ways off from the building. And generally, I don't know if the thinking is still that the safest way into the site is from that southeast corner, but in this case, you also have Woolworth continuing as a road opportunity. So you have traffic also going in on the west corner, southwest, and that traffic would continue to move through the site to Woolworth and back. So this, for those who were asking at the meeting, really kind of keeps that as the primary axis, but it still does provide the loop on the alternate side to allow us to create the queuing and improve the safety considerations and drop-off.
And this is, just to underscore it, this is the ad reno option.
This is the ad reno
Even though
option.
it says new school on the, sort of,
That's,
I wanted to
yeah.
clarify that.
Yeah, right, simply trying to say that portion of it is new.
Is,
Yeah.
right.
I think service and loading is still a question on my mind on these options, so on the new ad reno, but that's a detail we'll work on further. If you go to the next slide, this just to give you a sense of the plan. So the cafeteria, again, is extended more broadly. We're exploring that you would put the arts together around the auditorium space, so music and art in that end of the building. The admin spaces are currently small, so you'd be expanding your admin, but stretching it across and creating a new visitor entry closer to the heart of the school. That's debatable. You could put the entry, if you wanted, still where it is. But then what we're trying to do is show a similar equivalency of academic wings. You have a 6th grade wing, and then half of the 7th, 8th, and then the rest of the 7th, 8th above. The gymnasium is placed here to get it closer to the fields, and allows the media center and STEM to sit sort of in the heart of the connection point between the existing and the proposed. It lacks a kind of integrity, but it's viable. You know, it stretches out a little bit in some ways, but I think that we feel it's viable. It does open up and create some great space to the rear that could be utilized as outdoor learning space. Keeps your solar orientation as we want it, and then gives us some opportunities to explore some of the front of the school, which would be to the west, as kind of hardscape entry plaza, you know, as we've seen elsewhere in other designs. Okay, this option, we showed you 3 options, I believe, last time of different configurations for the new construction, 3 or 4. And this one we wanted to, I think there was a question about efficiency. So we wanted to take one of those schemes that seemed, you know, kind of tighter and try and explore that a little bit more, partly to show a cafetorium option to you. So that's taking the one we called angled wings, I think, that shows you that with the stage attached to the cafeteria, and you'll see this in plan a little bit more. So all of these options ahead are ultimately have the same benefits in terms of that original list of priorities that you had. That you could keep students in Williams while this is being built. The cost of Glenbrook demo would not be eligible for reimbursement, but Williams would. Now you lose the concerns about compromised educational spaces or ceiling heights. You get some better daylighting, and it does meet, it allows us to work with the district to try and meet those adjacency goals the district had throughout, rather than having to kind of compromise them. Go to the next slide. This is also, you'll see 128,477 square feet. That's important to note because that shows the difference when you include the auditorium. In site plan, this again takes from what you saw previously, where we're again trying to do 200 parking spaces, but all we would be redoing completely that field area at the back. It's hard to see because the underlying building there is in white, but that area around the field would all be green space, as well as the far northeast corner. And you can kind of see that what this does is it puts a very 2-story wall pretty much towards Williams. That was one of the things that we found in our conversation was a challenge. You'll see that, but it brings all the classrooms to the front, puts all the community spaces to the rear, and allows you an access directly through a plaza into the building at the rear for nighttime events or basketball, et cetera. And then you see that dashed line around through the green is that sort of soft line that reflects the fire and police access that would only be in emergency conditions. And that would obviously get designed based on what we do back there, but that's simply to imply that you have 360 support around the school.
Hey, Dory, just the one question I have. They all show a central corridor, which I know they said they wanted. I mean, from a safety perspective, do we have like a safety consultant who signs off on that? Okay.
Right.
All
Yeah,
right.
you'll have a safety consultant who'll be very involved and.
Okay.
Yep.
I just think the line of sight can be good and bad,
Different
right?
perspectives. Yeah, it's
So,
actually a really controversial question, you know.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Yeah. At this point, these are pretty schematic,
Right,
you
yep,
know,
yep.
how undulating that is ahead. So just in plan view, you see that this separates the CAF and Media Center a little bit because we have to get those classrooms around the gymnasium and all the support spaces around the gym. Gives the gym north light and cafeteria north light, which can be really nice. It gives the classrooms the lighting they need and does have a very, very strong central axis. And it's probably from a traffic flow, it gives you this like point in the middle here that a lot happens where we're showing sort of unimplied stairs. It keeps the admin to the front of the school, facing towards Williams. So I think it has a very strong read as being a school from Williams as you drive by, which some people may prefer. Otherwise, it does have those spaces around the school that can allow for outdoor learning, particularly focusing on STEM. So across from the media center are the STEM spaces. And then we have music classrooms near to the cafeteria in order to be adjacent to the stage. And it keeps a loading dock to the west. This option is the extension of, furthering of the design that was pretty strongly supported. Previously, there was a request to look at how that might create a kind of a, if you'll see in the site plan, if the queuing goes up and back, that perhaps there needs to be an entry to the west rather than to the south, so this actually allows for both accommodations. Again, this option includes the auditorium.
Can you hold on for 1 second? So I'm looking at that plan again. That plan queues 100 cars versus the 60 that we had.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 100 cars in the queue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So you can see this is a larger footprint. This reflects all, we've done this with the gym and auditorium and also then with a gymatorium, but it could be a cafetorium. It's just, we just wanted to differentiate a little bit here. So I think that you now know the values of the new versus Benno. Going to the next slide. So this is just a small revision of what you saw, relatively speaking, on this one. We tightened up that parking so that they were all consistently 200. This shows 100 vehicles in queuing, and it shows the potential for as many as 7 buses queuing. And it shows that play area with that circulation going around. So those are the major changes. Again, it does keep the width of the road, widens road really to allow the circulation through from Woolworth through the site, but not as a direct path. It becomes kind of separated from the parking going to the east side of the site rather than the west side of the site. And then in plan, just keep this concept in mind as we shift to the next one, but it shows the cafeteria having nice outdoor space, but also connected to the gymnasium, and allows the auditorium and gym still to have that strong community connection to the rear of the site where that larger parking space is. And again, partly based on conversations with the district, that idea of visitor entry and then a secondary entry around admin, so that again, from Williams, the school would not feel as overwhelming driving by. It wouldn't kind of close the site off because it's a narrower front, and you instead break the mass up into chunks, which I think also potentially has a more positive relationship to the scale of the neighborhood. Yeah.
Sorry, Josh.
On that design, so you mentioned that you get a nice light on the cafeteria if it was on the north side. Is that So would the cafeteria be kind of dark here?
Well, it wouldn't be dark, it would be west-facing, because the cafeteria will have super high ceilings, but it is more west-facing. And we're concerned about that as well. We sort of played with it two ways. We kept it there because the principal liked having the ability to sort of supervise the cafeteria easily from a main axis. It would also be possible for this to be designed such that it would be more within that second bar and have more north light instead of west, or a combination of north and west. So it could be configured in different ways, and kind of getting reactions is helpful. But we were trying to support their desire to have the gym CAF connection and the CAF media center and corridor connection, and have it be kind of essentially part of that end of the school, and easily accessible to everyone.
Roughly, if you add the auditorium, it adds roughly how much square footage, all things being equal? If you add an auditorium.
4,980.
4,980.
More or less.
More or less. Yeah. And again, those become the rules that we try to live with.
Yeah.
So. So this option, then you're moving now into the next option, where the stage, just to explore the option, we put the stage at the end of the gymnasium. So you drop that square footage down. Going into the next slide here, you don't see a lot of difference in the plan because it's a relatively small change. What's actually happening, I believe, is that top bar is kind of shifting a little bit, is what you mostly see. You can go to the next slide, I think, and see that laid out there. Right, so you see that purple chunk. So circulation into the gym, and that, in a sense, kind of is different than the Granby, where it was on the side. And if the stage were in the gymnasium, then we would design the gymnasium to feel good as a presentation space. It would put a different challenge on us to do that, but that just becomes part of the challenge. That you see the cafeteria here has that position I was talking about, where it's north with a little bit of west, so shift there. Cafeteria has its own access through on the interior, so all things that we can explore. So I just thought we'd pull back to this slide, which we used in the community meeting, to remind you what we're looking at here at the moment for cost estimating, pending your decisions here. So Glenbrook code upgrade and Williams code upgrade are required to be estimated and carried forward. One's already been done, the other will be done. Now we're looking at the Ad Reno Williams 665, the new Williams. So the 3,700 square feet is the size of the Williams auditorium. The difference of the new full auditorium gets a little bit bigger. And then the cafetorium and gymatorium options, just, as you've seen, new option. So at this point, we could take all of these in, or just essentially, eliminate in our minds one of the green, is your call, really. Because they're going to price out the same. And then there's no real need we can stop and talk about these, but this just puts us back here. And then this is, if you want to, as we did before, where we had a matrix and you all talked about it, you talked about wanting to communicate with it, we can do that again. If you go to the next slide, we now eliminate that and try and then take us to what we're looking at here in a numerical way. And again, this is up to you all to revise further as you like.
Yeah, I think at this point, we need the numbers. Yeah. To even go any further.
Yeah.
Anybody disagree, or?
No, it's kind of arbitrary. There are 5 points, 1 point swing on space needs and vision. We have to decide if it's worth, how much that's worth.
Right. And if the 1% reimbursement or whatever else, yeah.
Right, yeah.
I know it's on 100 million, so 100% is a lot of money, right? Yeah. All right.
Great.
And then you guys.
This is just, I'm not going to speak to it, this is way out of my lane. Literally.
So we know that there are queuing issues on Williams Street right now. So we looked at adding a eastbound left turn lane on William Street, and this would be entering a proposed driveway that was shown in the concept plans. And now the site would be the brand new buildings would be designed to accommodate queues within the site. So we would hope that that would mitigate the queuing issues experienced today. But we thought that a left turn lane would further limit any potential queues on William Street. So the red lines, I don't know if everyone can see those okay, but those are the right-of-way lines. So we were able to fit this within the existing right-of-way with a little bit of widening on the north side of William Street. And we held the southern curb line because you do have a steep slope there that we were trying to avoid impacting. And yeah, so this turn lane would accommodate about 6 vehicles, a little bit less if there's a bus or 2 in there. But we feel that this would definitely help with the queuing issues under a new school.
This is definitely taking the design beyond the PSR phase that we're at, but we thought with the interest with this specific issue, thanks to Ty and Bond for really getting into more detail than we're used to getting into at this phase of the project, but wanted to evaluate the possibility of this.
Since we're hearing from Ty and Bond,
additional.
what's going on with, what's the plan on any of these with Woolworth? Are you at that point? Is that expected as an entryway at all, or is that exit?
So as part of the traffic study, we looked at a single access point where it is today at Williams and closing off Woolworth. That was kind of the worst case scenario. You're bringing all the traffic to a single point. So we'd expect to see better operations if you're adding the 2 driveways on William Street plus an additional access point on Woolworth. You're just further dispersing the traffic headed to the school.
I think it's really important that we keep Woolworth open as an entryway. It would help this side immensely, and people are going to drive that way if it's closed off anyway. And so if we take that into consideration, and this, I think this would be very helpful as well. That'd be a good idea.
Yeah, I just want to clarify though, you ran multiple scenarios. One of those scenarios was closing Woolworth. It was a possibility, it wasn't a decision, there was nothing made. It was what would happen if we closed it off on the site? Then we looked at multiple other scenarios of widening the road, making the loop. I just want to make people understand that there are multiple scenarios that are being looked at so that nothing can be said that they didn't look at all of that. The committee didn't look at all of the opportunities that presented itself with the traffic. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's correct. We were only tasked with looking at 2 scenarios. I mean, we could have come up with 10 scenarios to look at. And the reality is, when we get to the town approval process in, I guess, 2025, we'll know the exact access to the site, and we'll really nail down into those details to reflect what's really going to be happening out there.
And then, Christian, let me just be careful what you said and make sure I state this correctly.
Yeah.
Is that at this point in any school building project, this is far deeper than you would be expecting for a traffic study and or traffic schematic until we got to site selection, and then we would do a far more detailed study of all of the options, right?
Exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly right.
Thank you.
I think one thing that's interesting about this is that I think in the community meeting, you actually said, well, turning lane, it's only going to hold a small number of cars and it's not going to be helpful. And you're right, at the moment when you have a lot of parents trying to get in, it's not going to make any difference. But there's a lot of the day where, I drive now down to through Long Meadow often, and I find myself waiting, for somebody to get out of the way on a 2-lane road, and it could be a while. So it helps, I think, keep things moving the rest of the day when you have that turning area. So you were right about that, but we did think it was helpful to, as whenever we can, we try to visualize it so people can see it. And that I think helps the conversations.
No, this is awesome. I'm glad you guys pushed this forward. Nicole?
No, you actually said what I was wondering, is that there is much more traffic studying to come.
Yes.
Which was
Yeah.
I wanted to clarify that as well, that this was earliest stages.
And is it accurate to say what was said at the top of the meeting, which is, as far as Woolworth, either you keep that open as an access off of Bliss, or you have to create the large turnaround for vehicles?
Yeah, I mean,
So-
at this point, all of our site plans are looking at connecting Woolworth through
Connecting it,
in
yes.
one manner,
Yes.
whether it's straight down or curving around the site.
Yeah.
And we would make sure that all those turning radiuses worked with, various vehicles, and we'll do that for the loading dock and for drop-off and pickup, and bus turning radiuses. We'll run all of those calculations, so.
Yeah, the idea of a turnaround there was just taking up so much space. It wouldn't have helped the project. It would have just compromised the site further. So it was agreed, with
Keeping
the
it open
commentary.
seems to be the
The
preferred
direction.
Yeah,
solution.
police and fire felt that way also.
Are there any other questions for our friends from Time Bond? Do you have anything else to add, or?
Do we want to talk a little bit about the circulation on site?
Sure, or
How
if there are, I mean, we went through it
Okay, you
quite a
already
bit
went through
before, so in terms of our previous meetings, so I think this group's already somewhat familiar. If you have any specific questions about any of those options and the circulation issues there?
My only question would be, so the plans for the Muslim show, the ability to hold 100 cars on site, how quick do you turn those over, I guess, or do you anticipate?
I mean, it really comes down to the operations of the parents and the teachers, and I think, Dora, you had a good example at a magnet school, maybe?
Right, yeah, and we've talked about that with the district,
Okay.
about the possibility that you actually have a sequence where, your parents queue up and you have staff there and they, everybody has a sort of, the parents are told long ahead of time, this is exactly the minute at which we will take students will come out of the car and the cars move forward, in chunks, and we do it. And the longer you have that queue, the easier that sequence becomes, which is kind of one reason why that long plaza area sort of is as an intriguing one, because it could speed that sequence more.
So as part of the
more easily.
plans, though, for the school, for the schematic design and traffic study, we would try and marry those two.
Yeah.
Like, we're gonna move 10 cars through, boom, another 10 cars, another 10 cars,
Yeah.
whatever the process is. Okay.
Exactly.
Nicole?
This might be a question for you, but it also might be a question for Lynn as well. When you're doing, down the line, the more involved versions of traffic studies, is there a number of cars? What's sort of the tipping point where a decision might be reached that it would be wise to have a traffic officer on site during drop-off and pickups to facilitate the turning right and turning left out of the lot? Is there, what are the criteria that
There's
point
not
us in
really
that
a
direction?
set criteria. I mean, if there was a safety issue that the district found and thought an officer might be helpful, that would be up to them. So there's not a set traffic standard for
Okay.
that sort of thing.
I'm just thinking down the lines of, I mean, right now, of course, we have far more students leaving the high school, but they're turning onto a side road, whereas this would be funneling cars at both drop-off and at the end of the day at pickup, back out onto what is already a main road in town, which means you might have a lot of backup happening from people turning left out onto the road. So I'm just curious if we've had any discussions with the police department yet, or if they've had any thoughts about if there might be a need for an officer to kind of keep that traffic moving. What would be their tipping
We
point?
haven't talked about that aspect of
It
it.
might be very
Since you're asking me right now, I would hope that whatever design we come up with, the solution does not include having a traffic officer there as part of the long-term plan. Yeah. But the financial aspect and then the logistical aspect of scheduling that every day, twice a day, for the full school year would be challenging.
Did you have something else to add?
Yeah, when we get further into design, we can look at warrants for adding turn lanes. Like, you'd have a dedicated left and a dedicated right turn lane. So if you're taking a left, you're not, or so if you're taking a right, you're not waiting behind those folks turning left onto Williams that might be waiting a little bit longer. Whether, it might be quicker to take a right, go around the block to get back to your house.
Yes, Lynn.
so I've observed and been caught in the traffic issues at all of the schools. But what I'm not, again, this is, I guess, a context question. At each site, do we know how many cars drop off or pick up approximately every day? Like, how many, is 100 cars going to absorb all of that? Or is that, like, where is that in terms of, where is 100 cars in terms of what we see daily now?
I don't have a good, I was out there on a bright sunny day and I don't know if that's indicative of the
But if you
middle
have
of winter.
100 cars in queue, where are the other cars? Where are the
Sorry,
other?
I'm
just,
sorry,
let
that's
me-
out of order.
Just,
you.
I guess, to reframe my question, did we do any traffic counts, or maybe it's premature right now for Williams or Glenbrook to know how many average car drop-offs there are for morning or pickups in the afternoon?
We did not do pickups and drop-offs. We just, the traffic turning into the site. But I mean, knowing there's only one bus currently, so we could tell you how many vehicles are turning into the site over a 2-hour span when we did our traffic counts. So that would give you a pretty good sense, and we have all that data we can provide.
And that is part of the detailed traffic and site perspectives when we do, which we'll get into with schematic design, correct?
Yeah, and, the populations change in terms of number of siblings and how many families, so not every individual student comes in a car, so it's a different number than that. And the district gives us information that we work from at this phase, and the greater detailed traffic study will get
Right.
more granular.
And it's a hard number to know 4
Right.
years from now, because what will our busing policy be, and,
Right.
what will,
Right.
how much access, will
Right.
families want for busing? And I think, we could know the number that Lynn's talking about, but again, you can't compare how we currently absorb 100 cars to how we would absorb 100 cars on a new campus, because the way we currently absorb 100 cars is terribly inefficient. And the way we currently, on the current site, the way it's currently operationally set up and the way the roadways are set up, we don't load and unload students very efficiently. And so in a redesigned site, you're able to move cars much more efficiently, you're able to extend the drop-off zones. And we would have to pay really significant administrative attention to how we, what our expectations are for unloading students from cars. You're also creating potentially additional entry points for kids to come into the school. So there's certainly ways to make it a more efficient process. And with better, safer, more efficient roadways, it no doubt will happen.
Yeah, Josh.
While we're thinking about the building design options, the scores are the same, except for the difference seems to be auditorium versus a cafetorium, gymatorium. Is there, from an educational standpoint and as educational architects and consultants, is there any, is either design better educationally? I know that's maybe a dumb question, but are there advantages to either one over the other?
That's a tough question because there's so many things to it. We've tried to apply the same rules based on the visioning process to each of them. Some are easier than others. Like that's why I was saying that I can't say for sure that in the ad reno we have to place certain things in the existing building, and those will be compromised for sure. They would not be as nice art rooms or music rooms as you would get in a new school, and we put them together in an area which could be very nice to have a neighborhood of art. There had been a desire for STEM and art to be kind of adjacent related. Otherwise, a lot of the things are really kind of similar. We've tried to keep the same neighborhood strategies in place for all options
Okay.
at this point.
And like the curved spine, does that separate the kids differently, or is it generally the neighborhoods?
It's doing the same thing.
place?
Part of what's a big driver here is that you have a larger first floor than second floor, and you want to keep your second floor efficient. So we've tried to do that in every scheme. The connection point in the ad reno was a challenge, which is why we kind of pushed it off a little bit to make it somewhat, it's a little less efficient than it might be, but it's actually more structurally feasible. But between the two new options, I think there's a kind of a density of all the wings being kind of coinciding, that is, you have basically all your academic together, and then everybody goes someplace else. Whereas the spine kind of has a little bit more, I think, social relationship that I think would be a little bit more successful, a little bit more overlap, and I think it gets daylighting into the building in a more interesting way, so it can be beneficial that way. The other thing you'll notice, I'd say, in the more efficient version, we actually think it's probably ultimately a bit smaller, because if you look at it, we've positioned the classrooms such that the window is on the narrow end of the classroom. So those classrooms will not have as much natural lighting. They'll still be the same size. We'll still try and create the same feeling. But I'll talk about this school as an example of that, right? So it's got a great sense of neighborhood, but it does have long, narrow, classrooms with a window at the end, which means that you're artificially lighting more of the room, and you're getting a little bit less natural light. So that's a classroom distinction that we typically try and favor getting more light on the long wall of the classroom where we can.
Any further
Any
questions?
other thoughts, Christian? No?
Right. Let's move on to the site survey investigations.
Yeah. Just an update. We shared the hazmat information at the last meeting, just to give you an update. The site survey is completed and being compiled right now, which is really exciting. And the geotechnical report
Can we hold on 1 second? I just want to make it clear to everybody about the hazmat, that, to the best of my knowledge, and Lynn, you can get me on this, that is in totally encapsulated hazardous materials at this point. It's not exposure, but it does need to be
sure.
remediated if we go and to take down the schools. Okay?
Right.
Thanks. Because I have heard a couple
Yes.
comments in the community in the last couple of weeks
yeah,
about
yeah.
there being asbestos in the school, and I just want to make sure they understand it's encapsulated asbestos as opposed to
Yeah.
free and loose.
Yes, it's often
Yes.
underneath the
Yes.
floor tiles and places like that, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very much intact. But it's important to note that those figures reflect costs that are a part of any demolition of either of those two buildings, and any ad renovation project as well.
Thanks, Dory.
So just the site survey is complete, and it's coming our way soon. The hydrant flow test is still scheduled for July 17th. The geotech report is, we spoke to them today. It's not come to us in writing yet, but we have Class D soils. It's viable for construction. We'll do more testing when we get more specific as where in the site we're going to be building. So we'll do more tests in the next phase of design once we narrow to our envelope location. But generally, positive results so far. The ground source well test has not yet been done, so that's still in front of us.
All right. Upcoming, we've got next steps. Adam, I'm looking at you on this one. We have our next meeting scheduled for the second week. Do we need an additional one at the end of the month for the submission review?
Yeah, so if we're looking at the end of August,
And looking at the committee, is anybody gone?
What's our next meeting again?
Our next meeting,
14th of August.
right,
I'm gone for
When is our cost, we're looking at our cost estimate window,
right,
and then being sure that they respond after that.
right.
And it is possible we would ideally have a second meeting to affirm the vote. It would be great to
the 14th?
to plan for a
Maybe like the
second
20th.
meeting, and it would be probably a fairly short meeting between the 14th and the 29th.
So like on the 26th?
27th is a Tuesday.
27th?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter to me. I mean, whatever people think works best for
So
that
it's
week.
first day of school.
The tw- What day is the first day of school?
27.
That's, huh? 27?
Everyone's,
Yeah.
kids
All
are in
right,
town.
we'll schedule a second one for the 27th. Anybody on the board have anything else?
Just a quick question.
Yes, Lee?
When are you closing the survey?
That's up to you all. When would you like to close it? It's-
I think we've reported out on it. I mean, just my
Yeah.
opinion, it's kind of like, okay, now we've reported out on it, why would we keep it up?
Yeah, it's definitely slowed down, so I,
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a tough time of year. Just curious.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah.
I won't promote it if we're gonna close
Yeah.
it.
I'd be inclined to, for the reasons Armin identified, I'd be
Yeah.
inclined to close it at this
I would.
point. So that makes sense.
That does not foreclose the possibility of hosting a
Of
different
another
one
one,
at a
right,
different
yes,
time,
right.
when people might be more available.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion adjourned, is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Marty?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Armin, yes. We are adjourned.
Thank you.